to ensure there's a direct correlation between our theories and practice. But most importantly, we are here to ignite the fire of transformative change to improve our conditions. And you all here are torchbearers in that process. So let's light this up and become the beacons of hope and change for our students throughout their educational journey to educational and economic emancipation, freedom, and liberation. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the following sponsors who made this possible: the Community College League of California, the Foundation for California Community Colleges, Equity, and the William and Lynn Pollan Foundation. I'd also like to thank my two co-moderators who'll be with me this whole week to facilitate your questions, to help guide us through the process of the panelists, as well as social media. And that is Katrina Linden, our Legislative Affairs Manager from the Campaign of Community Colleges, as well as Professor Eric Handy, a Mojo Coordinator and Amend Board Member from Diablo Valley College. So with that being said, I want to invite my brother Ian Handy to the stage to kind of guide us through the social media process.
Thank you, Dr. Bull, for that wonderful intro. Good morning. Thank you all, the participants and panelists, for being here with us today. We want to encourage you to join the conversation by following us on the social media platforms, Instagram and Twitter, at CA Black Students, all one word. Please engage in the conversation by using hashtag the Black Hour, hashtag Black Student Success, hashtag Black Student Success Week. We really want to hear from you. Your voice is needed. Your voice is wanted. Also, all webinars will be live streamed and available for you on our YouTube channel, again, at CA Black Students, one word. Lastly, want to just give a big shout out. Surprise week, we got something going on. During the webinar series, we will include visual summaries that are produced by live sketch artists, courtesy of the Sketch Effect. Now at this time, I want to kick it back to Dr. Bull.
Thank you, Professor Handy. So I've got the privilege today to announce our fearless leader. You all know him, Chancellor Oakley. He embodies the impact of California Community Colleges. He is our Chancellor, a fearless leader, originally from South Los Angeles. He's a son of his father and mother actually from Mexico as immigrants. He served in the Army, but most importantly, he is a product of the community college system as a former transfer student from Golden West College. He transferred to the University of California, Irvine, where his bachelor's degree in environmental analysis and design and his master's degree in business administration. Chancellor Oakley has served as the California Community College's chancellor since December of 2016. He's an ardent advocate of the vision of success, a clear-eyed, honest look at where the California Community College is succeeding and where it's falling short. And that is the authenticity that we're talking about this week. This document, the North Star of the California Community Colleges, establishes a vision for important improvement with clear goals and a set of commitments needed to ensure student outcomes significantly improve. Chancellor Oakley's trailblazing efforts at putting students first have been acknowledged throughout his appointment to the California Forward Leadership Council, the California Economic Summit, the Fair Shake Commission, the California Community College Commission on the Future, and the American Association of Community Colleges 21st Century Commission. So we are excited to have Chancellor Oakley to provide us some opening remarks. Chancellor Oakley, the floor is yours.
All right, Dr. Bull, thank you for that intro. And it's wonderful to see you all here. It's wonderful to have somebody like Dr. Bull introduce me, because it is a clear picture. It's a clear preview of the amazing talent we have in the California community colleges. In particular, today highlights the amazing Black talent that we have in the California community colleges, which is leading the way. So I want to thank Dr. Curry and his whole crew here today, everyone behind the scenes helping to make this Black Student Success Week a reality. It is happening, we are here, and this is just the beginning. So thank you all who have made this week possible. So first, on behalf of the Board of Governors and all of us in the California Community College Chancellor's Office, thank you all for being here. Thank you for bringing your voice to the table. Thank you for being willing to have a courageous conversation about race, about Black student success. You know, a lot of people ask me why focus on Black students. I say, you know, as a Latino student, as a Mexican American growing up in LA, you know, we cannot be complete unless we move forward, we bring with us, we encourage, lift, and support our Black students and make sure that they are succeeding. That's what student success is all about. All of us working together to ensure everyone has equal access, has the opportunities that they deserve to be part of the California economy, be part of the American dream, to contribute in the ways that we know our students can add to the fabric of our society. So today is about being unapologetic. The whole week is about being unapologetic. And I love that catchphrase. I love that tagline. I love that framing, because we have to be unapologetic. This is about placing a mirror in front of us and making sure that we see what is truly reflected in that mirror, being honest about it, being clear about it, and being willing to take action in response to it. So this is really about action. As many of you recall, soon after the murder of George Floyd, we launched the call to action. This is an important part to that call to action, and I want to thank all the leaders in the system who have been part of this. This is exactly what we want to see in that call to action. Everybody coming together and raising their voice, speaking about race and ethnicity in our system, thinking about the historic barriers that we've inherited as part of our system of higher education, and beginning to dismantle them. And we can't dismantle them until we talk about them, until we're honest about them. And so that's why this has to be unapologetic. And we have to work with leaders in our system, but also outside of our system, our policymakers, our legislative leaders, state leaders, our leaders in Washington, D.C., to be as unapologetic as we are being here. So I know you have some great speakers here today. Certainly, you have my boss, Ms. Pam Haynes, President of the Board of Governors, who will be introduced a little later. And you also have a good friend and colleague in Dr. John King, our former U.S. Secretary of Education, and someone who is no stranger to this work. And of course, for those of you who don't realize it, Dr. King is also running to become the first Black governor of the state of Maryland. So if any of you want to help him achieve that goal, please just Google John King for governor of Maryland. Anyway, it's a pleasure to welcome you today. I say that because it is a pleasure, because it's a pleasure to see the amazing amount of talent that's pulling this forward. But it's also a period of time in which, you know, I'm conflicted. We're talking about Black student success this week, but we cannot talk about it in just 1 week. This has to be a conversation, a thread that pulls through every single day of our work as educators in the California Community College system. I, like many of you, have been in the system a while, and we talk a lot about Black student success. We see the data, we walk out of the room upset, disgusted, and then we carry on about our normal lives and nothing changes. This cannot be one of those moments. This has to be a very different moment, which will require all of us to come to this table with the urgency that it deserves. We cannot leave another generation of Black students behind, particularly in the wake of everything that has gone on in the last year. So I hope you join us in the call to action. I hope you join us in the work that we're doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I hope you join us in the advocacy that we must do right now. This is budget season in the California legislature. We need to put our students at the front of the line. And so I hope you join us in all of that work. And I thank you all for being committed, not just today, but for the next 365 days and beyond. Let's do this work together, and let's keep pushing forward, and let's continue to be unapologetic. So with that, thank you. I know you've got a great schedule today, so I will turn it back over to Dr. Bull.
Thank you, Chancellor Oakley, and thank you for your courageous leadership and your character and your vision. And as you mentioned earlier, part of us working together as a team is that we have unapologetic leaders in this process, including you. But I also want to introduce a phenomenal individual that we all have gotten to know in the past few years, and that's Ms. Pam Haynes. She told me not to call her Pam, only her mama can call her that. So make sure to call her Ms. Haynes. She's appointed by the California Community College Board of Governors. She's appointed to the California Community College Board of Governors by former Governor Jerry Brown in 2016. She has served previously on the Los Rios Community College District Board of Trustees for more than 20 years, including four terms as board president. She also sits on the Board of Trustees for the Community College League of California and the Los Rios Foundation Board, before retiring from state service in 2012. She served for 8 years as a deputy director and senior consultant for the California State Assembly, Speaker Office of Member Services. Prior to that, she was the legislative director for the Capitol Office of Assemblymember Mark Ridley Thomas. Ms. Haynes has also worked for the California Labor Federation, the AFL-CIO, the City of Sacramento, the Bureau of State Audits, and the Department of Health Services. As Santa Monica College transfer student, she has a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. We're not gonna hold that against her as a Trojan, it's okay. We'll let Bruins pass today. And she has a master's degree in public administration from Harvard, the Ivy League. This woman is a phenomenal Black woman that exudes leadership, and I'm always privileged and honored to be in a space with her. Ms. Haynes, the floor is yours.
So thank you for that introduction. And I need to let you know that while I went to UCLA, my daughter went to USC and her dad went to USC. So it's sometimes we get in arguments over sports, but it's all good. You're going to hear a couple of things that they say if you say something 3 times, then you're bound to remember it. So redundancy in this case is good. I'm glad to be here. I was here last year. It was in the middle of the pandemic. Our colleges were closed. We went to virtual. We've thrived. We've gotten through that. We now have a vaccine. We have a new administration. These are critically important, and we have funds. We have money. Some people have it in their pockets. There are dollars to be spent. So when someone says follow the money, we need to follow the money on behalf of our students. There's an urgency in this work, and this week is critically important. It is important that we speak truth to power, and in that case, there's power on the outside because we have power in speaking it, but we've got to speak power to our legislators. It's critically important for you, our students, and I'm hoping then when you go into these meetings that we have a student there and to tell your story. Your story is critically important for our legislators and their staffs to know who you are and what you bring and the challenges that you may have, and that you are trying to thrive in our educational systems. We are at a moment in time where we have the opportunity to build back better, and that includes our educational institutions. And some of that means that we really have to recognize the true cost of college for you. It is not just the college fees. It's about housing. It is about food. It is about childcare. It is about transportation. It's about the technology. And so we want to make certain that our community college students, you included, your voices get heard relative to that true cost of college and the true cost of attendance relative to that. We want to build equitable campuses and classrooms and make certain that the environment is an environment in which you thrive. I can't say it any better than our chancellor just did. There is an urgency of now. And we want our community colleges, you included, to be at the front of the line. We want you to be unapologetic because you have a right to be here and you have a right to a quality education. And we want to meet you and we want our legislators to meet you where you are. So I know that there's going to be wonderful speakers behind me and I don't want to take up a lot of time. This is about equity. This is about diversity. And this is about inclusion. And that has to be the link between everything that we say and everything that we do. I'm hoping that you have wonderful meetings, even if they are via Zoom, and that you will continue the fight, continue the argument, and to continue the pathway to your education. I too went to a community colleges, as you heard, and my pathway was a long one. I am privileged by going to a community college because it set the framework for me to get into and to go to UCLA. It set the framework for me to go to Harvard. But it has made me a better person, and it is the reason why I'm here with you today. So again, thank you for this time, and my best wishes, and I will be with you as you do those meetings with legislators. Tell them who you are and what it is you're aspiring to, because we want to help you make that happen. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes, and absolutely agree with you that unapologetic, fearless leadership, this is our moment, this is our time. And so as the sketch comes up, I have the privilege and honor to really introduce our keynote speaker for today. And feel free to utilize our hashtags to ask any questions via social media. We have with us John B. King Jr. He is the president and CEO of the Education Trust, a national nonprofit organization that seeks to identify and close educational opportunity and achievement gaps. Dr. King served as the U.S. Secretary of Education in the Obama administration. Prior to that role, King carried out the duties of the Deputy Secretary, overseeing policies and programs related to P-12 education, English learners, special education, innovation, and agency operations. King joined the department following his post as New York State Education Commissioner. And at that moment, he was the first African-American and Puerto Rican to serve in that role. King began his career as a high school social studies teacher and middle school principal. In tapping him to lead the U.S. Department of Education, President Obama called King an exceptionally talented educator, citing his commitment to preparing every child for success and his lifelong education as a teacher, principal, and leader in school systems. We are honored to have him with us today. He's in the midst of a gubernatorial candidacy, as we can tell from earlier. And so we would love to give him the stage. And if you have any questions, we'll have a few moments here in the chat box, as well as the social media to ask him. Mr. King, Secretary King, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, of course, to President Curry for the opportunity to join all of you, and just want to acknowledge and celebrate the work that Eli Oakley and Pam Haynes are doing at the system level to strengthen opportunities for students of color and low-income students throughout California. Look, we gather at this moment where we are really grappling as a country with, in my view, three different pandemics. We've got the pandemic of COVID, which we are hopefully making our way towards the end of. But then we've got the pandemic of economic crisis that has been created around the country and the world because of COVID. And then we've got the pandemic that has always been with us as a country, the pandemic of systemic racism. And as we grapple with those, this conversation about Black student success is crucial to how we meet all of those challenges. So it's in that spirit that I want to share a few reflections, and I hope a call to action. One, we've got to acknowledge that the challenges that we face in higher education actually begin much earlier. As a country, despite the promise of equality of opportunity, we still give the least to the students who need the most. It is sadly true that low-income students and students of color, particularly African-American students, are less likely to get high-quality early childhood education, are in K-12 schools that are systematically under-resourced. We've shown at the Education Trust where I work, we've shown that there's a nearly $2,000 per student gap in spending between the districts that have the most white students versus the districts that have the most students of color. The students are getting less resources in K-12, they're getting less access to the strongest teachers, less access to school counselors. We know from civil rights data, we have 1.7 million kids in this country who go to a school where there's a law enforcement officer and no school counselor. And think about that. Think about what that means for the school to prison pipeline. That in a school, the only person to refer a student who's struggling socio-emotionally to is a police officer rather than a counselor. So we have these systematic inequities in K-12, and of course they then translate into students being differentially prepared for higher education. And then in higher education, we repeat those resource inequities. The Center for American Progress recently did a study showing that public colleges spend $5 billion less each year to educate students of color than they spend to educate white students. And so systematically, we are making less investment in students of color, even though today, students of color are a majority of the students in our K-12 system. So in higher ed, we're investing less, and we're systematically investing less in the very institutions that are the key to future social mobility. We're investing much less in our community colleges than we are in our flagships, much less in our minority serving institutions than in our predominantly white institutions. And the consequence is that students of color have less of the support they need to graduate, less of the support they need to make successful transitions to work. They are burdened with a disproportionate share of debt. So that's the landscape into which we enter this conversation. And the truth of the matter is, over the last 4 years, the landscape has worsened under the Trump administration. Right? Under the Trump administration, there was a series of proposals to reduce investment in public higher education, reduce investment in students. There was a systematic effort to favor for-profit colleges, despite their very troubling track record. You all know, as Californians, the story of the Corinthian College, a predatory for-profit set of colleges, the Corinthian colleges that took advantage of students. They were shut down during the Obama administration. We put in place an enforcement unit to go after predatory for-profits that would take advantage of students, particularly students of color and low-income students. And the Trump administration undid all of that work we did on enforcement. They undid the work we tried to do to hold schools accountable for whether or not students graduate and get good jobs. Secretary DeVos put predatory for-profit executives in charge of higher ed policy. That made the situation worse. What is hopeful is now, as we enter into a new administration, we are seeing some very meaningful signs of progress. We see it in the American Rescue Plan, which dedicates $40 billion to higher education, at least half of which goes directly to students. We see it in the proposals around infrastructure that include significant investment in research at minority serving institutions. We expect it in the proposals that will be forthcoming around a federal state partnership to make college, we hope, much more affordable, beginning with a version of what we in the Obama administration proposed as America's College Promise, a federal state partnership to make community college tuition free, as well as requiring significant new investment from states in supports for community college students. So we hope to see that proposal forthcoming. We also hope to see what President Biden promised during the campaign, a doubling of Pell Grants, which would of course help students not only deal with the cost of tuition, but also books and fees, help tackle the crisis of housing and food insecurity on community college campuses, also help students who are parents. Remember, 1/5 of our college students in the country are parents, and they need help with the cost of childcare. So we have an opportunity, I think, with the current administration, the current Congress, to see a new level of investment in students of color and Black students in particular. I'm very optimistic about that. As we make those investments, we also have to be thinking about completion, right? How do we not only make college more affordable, but how do we help students be more successful? That means investing in wraparound supports, better advising, better access to summer internships, to job counseling for jobs that students will take after school. It means making the transfer process easier between community colleges and four-year institutions. It means getting rid of dead-end remedial courses and replacing them with co-requisite courses that help students gain credits as they move through addressing any gaps in their preparation. Those investments have to come alongside the investments in affordability, and I'm hopeful that we'll see that from the federal government. But let's be clear that all of those policy changes have to happen alongside a shift in mindset about the success of Black students. You know, last summer, after the murder of George Floyd, after the murder of Breonna Taylor, after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, there were all these protests across the country. And you saw higher ed institutions, school districts, government leaders, and leaders of corporations all make these very broad statements, these commitments of solidarity with the protests, and these commitments to the idea that Black lives matter. But in too many places, that commitment, those words, were rhetoric, not reality, and haven't been followed through upon. So what my question is for system leaders, for higher ed leaders across the country, if you believe Black lives matter, how are you showing it in your policies? We know, for example, including in California, Black students are significantly underrepresented in state flagships, in selective admission four-year colleges. If Black students aren't on campus, then I don't believe you when you say Black lives matter. If your faculty is not representative, we have hundreds of colleges in this country that have not a single tenured Black faculty member. If you don't have Black faculty, then I don't believe you when you say that you believe Black lives matter. If you don't have Black folks in administrative roles, in leadership roles on your campus, then I don't believe you when you say Black lives matter. When we look at curriculum, I worry that in too many places, students never get to see themselves represented. If your curriculum at your higher ed institution or your K-12 school district for that matter doesn't grapple with the hard parts of our history, issues like slavery and segregation and redlining and their consequences, I don't believe you that you think Black lives matter. But if you also don't have examples of Black excellence and Latino excellence and Asian American excellence and Native American excellence, then I'm not convinced of your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. If in your curriculum there are not Black authors, then I'm not convinced of your commitment. So we need to see it in the student body, we need to see it in the faculty, we need to see it in the curriculum, we need to see it in the climate, real accountability for the racial climate for students. Are students being harassed by campus police officers? Are students getting the kind of message from campus leadership and everyone at every level of the institution that they belong on campus, that they have a right to be there, that the institution is committed to their success as Black students? If the campus climate isn't strong, and if you aren't regularly measuring that campus climate, asking students about their experience and then acting on that data, then I'm skeptical when you say that you believe Black lives matter. So this is the work. And I would say, here's the call to action, and then I'll wrap up. All of us have a responsibility both to call out what is wrong and to take personal action to try to change it. And we all have that responsibility, we all carry that responsibility. And as I say that, I think about the fact that I'm sitting in Silver Spring, Maryland, where I live. And I'm sitting about 25 miles from where my great-grandfather was enslaved in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And I'll tell you that the property where my great-grandfather was enslaved still owned by the family that are direct line descendants of the family that owned my family. And the property has been preserved just like it was in 1863. You walk on the property, everything looks the same as it did then, including the cabin where my great-grandfather and his family lived. And so I've had the chance to visit the property, come to know this family, and to spend time in that cabin. So when I think about what it means that my family in 3 generations went from enslavement in that cabin in Gaithersburg to serving in the cabinet of the first Black president, that is a powerful vision of what is possible in this country. But it is also a reminder that slavery is not that long ago, 3 generations ago in my family. And we are still grappling with the legacy of that institution. But I am blessed to live because my ancestors survived. I'm blessed to have the life that I do because they lived for a future they could not see. And so I want us all to think about what is it that we want to accomplish? What is it we want to do in this world that will make a difference for the lives of people 100 years from now, 200 years from now? And I believe part of that work is the work to ensure that Black students have the support they need to be successful in our higher ed institutions. And I'm so grateful to President Curry for leading on these issues, not just for the Compton College community, but for the nation. So thank you all for the opportunity to be with you, and happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Well, I'd first like to say thank you, Dr. King, for your amazing remarks today. Always wonderful to hear you speak, and just want to thank you for joining us today, and wish you the best of luck on your candidacy. You shared a lot about the national perspective, and it's clear from the Follow the Money report that we published recently in collaboration with A2 Men, that California is really no exception to the underfunding of Black students across the state. So it's just really telling about California faces the same issue as every other state does. So first question from our audience, this is a recurring one I've seen throughout the chat. You note really that Black students are, or I guess it's known that Black students are overrepresented in our for-profit colleges, and we've seen a decline in California community college enrollment for most students. How do we intentionally eliminate barriers to Black student enrollment? This question is from Armia. And then additionally, initiatives have really failed us so far. Are there new innovative strategies that we can explore, not only in California, but across the state as well?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think where I'd start is that we ought to shut down bad actor for-profit colleges, and I hope that the Biden administration will stand up the capacity to do that. Just like we don't let somebody sell a used car with no engine, we shouldn't allow a college just to sell you a phony degree in a phony program. So we should start with that. We shouldn't allow people to be taken advantage of. But even without those predatory colleges in the picture, I think we got to do a lot more to make college affordable and accessible to students. Affordable means to me doubling Pell and making the investment to make community college tuition free for all students. But at the same time, we also need to start earlier. I would love to see a lot more dual enrollment programs where students can start taking college courses while in high school. And they could do that on campus, but they could also do that, we've seen, online. Northern Virginia Community College outside of DC last summer offered 5 free community college courses online to any student in the Northern Virginia region. I'd love to see more community colleges making that kind of opportunity available. I'd love to see more investment in school counselors. I think in California, the ratio of students to counselors is something like 500 to 1, if not more. How can a counselor possibly help students make decisions about post-secondary planning with that large a student load? So more investment in counselors would mean more support for students' socio-emotional needs, but also more help in navigating the process of getting to college. I'd also like to see us do more for folks who are incarcerated, impacted by the criminal justice system. Congress last year finally repealed the ban on Pell Grant access for incarcerated students. We should have quality higher education programs in every prison in this country. And we should be doing everything possible to get rid of barriers to access for folks who've been impacted by the criminal justice system.
Well, thank you for that answer. It sounds like California has a lot of policies that address a lot of these things moving forward right now. So definitely excited to see what comes in the next year. Let's see. So next question from our group. Or actually, I'll pass it to Eric because I think we have time for one more. Eric, is there anything from social media that you wanted to flag for Dr. King before he wraps up?
How do we intentionally eliminate the barriers to Black student enrollment? Initiatives has failed us so far. Are there new initiatives, strategies that can be explored?
Yeah. Look, I think we have to start earlier. Students often get discouraged in middle school and the early years of high school. So I would love to see a lot more programs that begin with middle school students, getting them onto college campuses, getting them exposed to the possibilities of college. I'd love to see a lot more programs that connect careers, high school and college. I was part of an effort earlier in my career to grow a network of schools called PTech, where students graduate from high school with a high school diploma, an associate's degree, first in line for a job. The first school was at IBM, but now they have got a number of partners, employer partners around the country. We need to do a lot more of that, high quality career in tech ed, where students can see in high school that there's a connection to the job they want to have, and then they move into community college or a four-year program and graduate with a degree, and then go right into that employment opportunity that provides a good wage, good benefits, good opportunities for advancement. But we have to, again, to me, this is about changing our mindset. I mentioned a majority of kids in the nation's public schools are kids of color. If we don't ensure the educational success of students of color and low-income students, we have no future as a country, right? Those are the stakes. And so if that was our mindset, we would organize all of our systems to ensure the success of our Black students.
Thank you for that, Dr. King. We really appreciate your powerful message and your powerful words today. Now I want to bring back in Dr. Bull.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Professor E. Handy. Thank you again, Dr. King. And
Thanks so much.
no problem. Good luck with everything. Thank you for inspiring us, and Katrina as well. So now we're gonna move on to the next segment of our program, and we're gonna break down some of the things that former Secretary of Education, Mr. King, spoke about. And we have three phenomenal panelists. You know them in the system and outside the system. So first with us, we have Dr. Edward Bush. He served 20 years of experience in higher education, with 17 of those years in the California community college system. Dr. Bush currently serves as the president of Consumers River College in Sacramento. He served as a tenured associate faculty member in student activities, director of the Education Talent Research Federal TRIO Grant, and dean of student affairs and student services. In addition to that, he served on numerous college district and statewide committees throughout his career. His scholarship. He's also known as the founder and vice president of AMEN. In addition to that, he's also served as an adjunct instructor at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Redlands and Brown University, and he's quite a published author himself. We also have with us Dr. Frank Harris. He's a professor of post-secondary education, the co-director of the Community College Equity Assessment Lab, CCEAL, at San Diego State University. He's best known for his expertise in racial inequity and equity. In post-secondary education, has made important contributions to knowledge about college student development and the social construction of gender and race in college contexts. His work prioritizes populations that have been historically underrepresented and underserved in education. Harris's scholarship has also been published in leading journals for higher education, and he's presented over 500 workshops and conferences and keynotes. Last but not least, we got the soul sister, Dr. Darla Cooper. She's an education leader and expert in research and evaluation, dedicated to using inquiry, data, and evidence to improve the lives of all community college students. She currently serves as the executive director for the Research and Planning Group, the RP Group, for the California Community Colleges. Dr. Cooper has also worked in the California Community College system for over 20 years, having previously held institutional research director positions at Santa Barbara City College, Oxnard College, and Laney College. She has led student support, redefined a landmark research project that examined what sports student supports looks like, and has been invited to present this work all across the nation. She's also a board member of Emoja, another unapologetically Black program. So this panel will be moderated by Katrina, and so feel free to ask questions via social media and engage the audience. So with that being said, the floor is yours, Dr. Cooper.
Thank you, Dr. Bull. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate being here. I can have my first slide, please. Thank you. So I'm here to talk about the Follow the Money report. So the first question we figure we need to answer is, how did we get here? And so in 2018-19, both Emoja and Amen brought together state leaders to develop a research and policy agenda that would focus specifically on Black student success in our California community colleges. As a result of meeting a few times, we did come up with several action steps, and one of those led to the Follow the Money report. Next slide, please. So this report attempts to challenge the current examination, how we currently look at state funding, which is typically by segment, our California community colleges versus the UC versus the CSU. However, when you look at the data that way, it does not take into account the differing demographics that we see in those three segments, especially looking at race. Next slide, please. So again, here's what we typically see, and the bottom row there shows the funding per student that each system receives from the state, and you can see that the California Community Colleges does receive less funding per student, and there are reasons for that, which we will not get into, but this is how we normally look at funding across our three higher education segments. Next slide, please. What we need to take into account is at which segment are our students attending college, or receiving their higher education. And so as you can see here, if you look at the blue bars, those are where our Black students are going, and 80% of them are attending the California community colleges. Next slide, please. We need to look at as well, we thought it was important to share what the Black student enrollment looks like currently in our system. And the tall bars in the chart represent our overall enrollment. And the smaller ones with the larger bolded numbers represents our Black student enrollment over the last several years. And you can see that it has been declining. And if you calculate the difference between fall 14 and fall 20, that's almost 35,000 students, fewer students that are not Black students who are not attending our system. It's an important note. Next slide, please. So we wanted to answer the question, so how much money is the state spending on Black students in higher education? So we wanted to disaggregate the funding data that we shared by race to indicate across the systems, across the three systems, to give us the average amount of money that the state is spending per Black student. Okay, by doing it this way, if there are disparities by race, they would be uncovered. And if there are, it might make it a little bit easier so that we can begin to address these disparities. Next slide, please. So this chart shows the results. Basically, I know it's a lot of numbers and a lot of bars and a lot of colors and a line, but if we had equitable funding across races, all the bars would be the same height. Okay. Right now, what we have is that our African American, our Black students are being funded at a lower rate than other students of other races. When you look at the chart, the dotted line is the average. When you add what that average amount, regardless of race, is across for each year. And then obviously the bars represent the different races when you do that calculation. And the Black students are represented by the blue bars every year. You can also see under the chart what numbers correspond to those bars. So in 2018-19, the average investment per student was $5,921. During that same point in time, the average investment per Black student was $5,665. So when you look at the data these way, you can see that there is a disparity, and it's based on the fact that most Black students are enrolled in the system that is funded at the lowest level. I now want to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Bush, to take the conversation from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. If we could go to the next slide. And as we go on to the next slide, I need y'all to take that information in. We don't have a lot of time for you to do that, but we need to begin to unpack the implication of the data that Dr. Cooper just laid out. It's important to take it in because it really is a continuation of a historic narrative. A historic narrative that more than suggests that in the history of this country, there has continuously been an underinvestment in Black folks in all segments of society. But today the focus is on our state and our system and how public education is funded with our tax dollars. And we continue to see the continuous economic marginalization and under-resource that is going into our communities to do equity work, to do racial justice work. We all have to be students of history. And when we study history, that we see that the data that Dr. Cooper just went through is nothing new. That we can draw a straight line, that we can make the direct connection, that we can lay out a parallel track of a very similar conversation that happened since Plessy versus Ferguson. So in 1954, we are all familiar with Brown versus the Board of Education that made the fundamental argument that the system of segregation in education that was supposed to be this idea of separate but equal was inherently separate and unequal because there was a lack of resources, funding, and money and dollars that were going into segregated Black schools. And so when we look at the community college system, when we look at those students, Black students who disproportionately are overrepresented in the community college system, disproportionately underrepresented in the California State University system, disproportionately underrepresented in the University of California system, we have a segregated system of public post-secondary education. And similar to 1954, the schools in which Black students attend, the segregated schools that Black students attend are still under-resourced, under-investment, that literally there are less dollars going into our children and folks who look like us education. But yet they expect us to be able to achieve in the midst of being underfunded. The public post-secondary structure for funding in the state of California is separate and unequal. Next slide. When we do this work, I mentioned that we have to be students of history. But we also have to have the courage and the willingness to be able to lean in on the truth, that we have to be willing to call the system out. We have to be okay with being uncomfortable, that we have to be okay to point out policies and structures and systems that are racist, that we need to stop fooling ourselves with these notions and ideas and ideology that the community college system was built on this notion of access for everyone, to level the playing field, because all of those notions and ideas that we love to believe, that makes us comfortable, that we write in our dissertations, in our papers, that we quote in our speeches, that lives on our community college documents and our website, have been built and predicated on a mythology. The truth is that our system and our structure in California is not broken. It's not broken when Black students are not succeeding. It's not broken when the community colleges are underfunded. It's not broken, but in fact, it is racist, and we have to call it out. It is racist at its inception. It's racist at its core. It's racist in its document. It's manifested in the California Master Plan. And so as we begin to try to find solutions, that we need to stop focusing on programs that we think is going to create a workaround, as opposed to looking at the core elements of the fundamental disease. And that fundamental disease is the sustained and systemic underinvestment in Black students that creates this perpetual economic inequality that has implications beyond education, but it creates a permanent underclass for African Americans in this state. We have a separate but unequal system of public education. And just like Brown and NAACP challenged the board of Topeka, Kansas, we must challenge the state of California to do better, to be better. But if we're going to call it out, we need to simply say, stop perpetuating a racist funding structure that harms Black students. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Frank Harris.
Thank you, Dr. Bush. As always, a tough act to follow, going to be tough, but I'm going to do my best to give it a shot here. Next slide. So I know many of our colleagues are looking forward to a quote unquote return to normal. Now that we see some evidence of students being able to return to campus as early as fall, but what we have to realize is that normal has never been good for Black students. Just take a look at the events that have happened over the past year. A racial reckoning and awakening that was sparked by the tragic murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And it breaks my heart to add the names of Dante Wright and Michaela Bryant and Anthony Thompson Jr. and Andrew Brown Jr. to this list, right? Black people who were killed just in the past week. We also have to think about chronic poverty and the disproportionate impact that it has on Black families and communities, with Blacks in California having the second highest poverty rate at just over 18%, despite comprising just over 5% of the state's overall population. In February, my colleague, Dr. J. Luke Wood, and I introduced this concept of race lighting to explain the process where Black and Indigenous people of color question their own thoughts and actions due to systematically delivered racialized messages that make them second guess their own lived experiences with racism. We have also argued that race lighting is directly connected to racial battle fatigue, imposter syndrome, and stereotype threat, all of which collectively affect the performance and well-being of both Black students and Black educators. And finally, as my colleague, Dr. Cooper, shared in her remarks earlier, Black enrollment has been steadily declining at least since 2014, not just since the pandemic, as some may assume. According to the campaign's 2021 State of Black Higher Education report, 18% of Black students in the state are enrolled in a for-profit institution, compared to only 10% during the 2016-2017 academic year. This is not to disparage for-profit institutions, but as noted in the campaign's report, these institutions have higher costs, higher student debt, and student loan default rates, and some of the lowest completion rates across all colleges and universities. Next slide. The aforementioned trends and issues that directly impact the lived experiences and success of Black students have to be addressed with bold and forward-thinking legislation. Regardless of how we may feel about the status of Black students in California community colleges, feelings alone cannot change the ways in which college and educators support students. Changes in policies, practices that are mandated by changes in policies are needed. The pandemic has provided a more transparent picture of why mental health support, technology access, and basic needs support are essential. The racial reckoning speaks to the need to build the capacity of educators to prioritize racial equity in their efforts to support students. Senate Bill 309, legislation that was proposed by Senator Connie Levi to provide $200 million in grants to improve access to and completion of the A through G requirements to more California high school students so that they can become eligible for admissions to the UC and CSU is an example of the type of legislation we need. Another example is Senate Bill 928, which is known as the Student Transfer Achievement Reform Act of 2021. This bill would do two things to really strengthen the associate degree to transfer for Black students, and not just Black students, for all students. First is require the CSU and the UC to work together to establish a singular lower division GE pathway that meets the transfer admission into both segments. And two, require the California community colleges to automatically place students into an ADT transfers pathway. And of course, many are keenly aware of the policy conversations that have taken place to modernize our Cal Grant system. And this Cal Grant program is the nation's largest system of financial aid, but it has not been updated in decades. Next slide. And finally, as we conclude, we call for race-conscious actions that can radically shift the trajectories of Black students in the California community colleges for decades. It is well understood, as Dr. Bush has noted, that the California Master Plan for Education systematically ensures that the UC gets the lion's share of the state's resources for post-secondary education, while the CSU and the community colleges, the segments that serve the overwhelming majority of Black students in public post-secondary education in the state, gets substantially fewer resources. Next, if enrollment trends that we have seen for Black students in the community colleges remain steady, we will continue to see significant declines in the number of Black students who enroll in the state's community colleges. Therefore, we need to come up with a comprehensive and coordinated system-wide plan that results in a significant increase in the enrollment of Black students. Third, immediately following the tragic murder of George Floyd, Chancellor Oakley called for actions in 6 key areas to address systemic oppression in education. As we approach the 1-year anniversary of this call, we need to publicly reaffirm it. Next, for the past several years, Dr. Bush and several other colleagues across the state have been advocating for the state's first community college that's rooted in a Black cultural identity. Now, perhaps more than ever, is the time to seriously consider this proposal. And finally, and along the same lines, we call for more state investments in state programs that have been designed to support Black students, notably AMEN, Umoja, and the HBCU transfer program. These programs are ran by amazing educators and amazing colleagues who do incredibly important work for Black students, but they cannot fully realize their potential unless they're adequately and beyond adequately fully funded. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Handy, who's going to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists for unpacking this report. Follow the money. Thank you, Dr. Cooper, Dr. Bush, Dr. Harris. It is clear public education funding in California has been outright negligent and criminal in nature at the cost of Black students and Black educators. Under-resourced institutions produce underperforming students. Therefore, an intentional focus on how we make systemic changes to support colleges and creating conditions for Black student success is imperative. In the light of Black Student Success Week, given that it is budget season, we must all ask ourselves, can we expect the system to use race-conscious funding formula to determine funding allocations to our colleges? Even more, what are you doing in your sphere of influence and control to circumvent this reality? Very, very plainly, we asking, are you being an accomplice to this crime or a radical change agent? Dr. Bush.
Thank you, and thank everyone. Get through this quickly. We had over 1,000 people on this call. 1,000 of you are equity champions in your institutions, as a faculty member, administrator, staff, and students, but I want you to, and ask you to wear a different hat. Not only do I want the 1,200 of you that were on this call to be equity champions, I want 1,300 of you on this call to become bill collectors. Now, maybe many of you have never had an experience with a bill collector, but I haven't always myself been a college president in my life. So I've had some experience with a bill collector. Bill collectors are aggressive, unrelenting, persistent, and pestering. They will get a hold of you and chase you down by any means necessary. Bill collectors will call your cell phone. They will call your job. They will send you emails. They will send you letters, and they will even send you different color letters depending on how late you are with your bill. But regardless of the method, they have one clear message and one clear goal, and that is to get you to pay up. So with this in mind, we need you to act like bill collectors, letting state policy makers know it is time to pay up, that your bill is decades past due, that for far too long, Black students in the California community college system has not received their equitable share. Pay up for the Black students who couldn't get access to a course because our colleges could not add an additional section because we didn't have the resources to do so. Need to pay up for all the Black students that had to sit in worn down, dilapidated buildings, labs, and classrooms. Pay up for the decades of Black students who had to wait multiple weeks just to see a counselor because we didn't have the money to hire more counselors. Pay up for the Black students who had to sleep in their cars because our system is not funded to have residence hall. Pay up for the Black students who had to make a choice when they got their financial aid dollars, whether to buy their books, to pay rent, or to get groceries because they decided to attend a California community college, so they received less state aid. Pay up for the Black students whose mental health is so strained because they're carrying the burden of working and going to school, only to find that our colleges are unable to hire social workers and mental health specialists. We need you to be bill collectors, aggressive, unrelenting, persistent, and pestering in your advocacy. Let's raise our collective voice and say, hello, Senator, hello, Assemblyman. I need to let you know that this is an attempt to collect a debt, that our records show that you have an account that is past due. Also, they need to let you know that this call is being recorded. How would you like to settle your debt? Because it is time to pay up.
Thank you. Powerful. Same time, thank you all, Dr. Bush, Dr. Harris, Dr. Cooper, Dr. King, Trustee Haynes, Chancellor Oakley, Professor E. Handy, Katrina, and all of you who participated and showed up. Same time, same place. You know what time it is. Pick up your phone. We're gonna see you. Take care.